The National Guard, close to running out of money for their salaries, lawmakers on Capitol Hill appear to be at an impasse over how to replenish those accounts. Weeks after warning of depleting funds, Senate Appropriations Chair Patrick Leahy introduced a $3.7 billion proposal yesterday. The measure would supplement security funding at the Capitol and related security efforts in the wake of the January 6th attack on the Capitol. On Friday, Senate Republicans introduced a smaller $633 million bill that focuses on funding for the Capitol Police and the National Guard. Democrats consider it a non-starter, saying it doesn't fully address all the costs incurred around the January 6th insurrection. Joining us now, Democratic Senator Sherrod Brown of Ohio. Also with us, MSNBC contributor Mike Barnicle.
So, Senator Brown, thank you so much for being with us. What's the difference between the Republican and the Senate version of this bill?
What is the difference between them, you say, Joe?
Yeah, what's the difference? Yeah.
Well, the difference is funding the whole complex, what we need to do. I was just talking to MSNBC staff here about how you guys, every hour, all 24 hours a day, have staff, have a camera here, have a live camera here, just in case. And it's not like the country is settled into bipartisan happiness and that there aren't still verbal and pretty nasty attacks on the system, on Biden, on politics, on staff, whatever. So it's important we do this right. That's why I spoke with Senator Leahy on the floor last night, and he wants to do it right. He knows we need to go fulsome, if you will, in this and make sure that the funding is done in a way that makes our country's government run smoothly.
Well, after January 6th, you would think everybody up there would agree with that position. I'm curious, what is the stated objection you hear from Republicans, and can you all bridge the gap?
Well, I'm hopeful we can bridge the gap. I think we'll find a way to get this done in close to the way that Senator Leahy wants to do it. I think the opposition from Republicans, from your old political party, Joe, is pretty inexplicable, just like all the votes against the January 6th commission. I was in the Capitol, as most of my colleagues were. I spent the night in my office that night. I didn't really want to walk home 20 minutes away, and I wandered around and saw what damage had been done. That's not counting the human damage, because everybody was already taken to the hospital, and the people who had been terrorized, the food service staff, the custodial staff that aren't paid very well, were terrorized in their little cubicles or holes in the wall offices or their supply closets during all that, and yet one party doesn't seem to think that much matters.
Senator, you posted some pictures last week, just a few days ago. For the first time, you said, "This is what I saw in the Capitol." It took those 6 months ago on exactly the evening you're talking about walking around the Capitol. They're pretty stunning images. You began to answer my question, which is, your Republican colleagues, your Republican counterparts, want to turn the corner and walk away from these pictures. They want to walk away from the images we're seeing again and again come out of courts across the country of police officers being beaten with American flags. When you talk to any of them privately, people you've known and worked with for a long time, how do they justify their position on January 6th, which it seems to be to turn the page?
Well, they say, let's move on. We have big problems to solve. And, of course, they're right as far as that goes. And those pictures, that is now my office in the Capitol. That was not my office at the time. And there's a half-moon window you saw in those pictures where the rioters came in with their flagpoles, with Trump flags and Confederate flags and American flags, breaking that glass, entering that room and just destroying everything in their wake. I was obviously not there then, and nobody was in that office then, but that's the kind of damage, and my colleagues all know that. I think the politics of it, I think there's still a fear that Donald Trump will attack them. I'm seeing that play out in a Senate race in Ohio now for my colleague Senator Portman's open seat, where they're like kids on a playground sticking their tongues out at each other saying Donald Trump loves me more than he loves you, and it doesn't get us very far as a nation. That's why it's so important what Biden's doing and what Senate Democrats and House House members are doing on the child tax credit, on the pension bill we passed. As you know, this week, 39 million children, 39 million families will get a check from the government, $250 or $300 per child every month starting this week. That's going to make their lives better because they're doing the hard work of raising children and trying to raise children right. And I did roundtables all over my state and heard these stories last week or 2 weeks ago of what these children face and these families face. And this is going to make a huge difference in the lives of literally tens of millions of families in this country. And that's what we need to be focusing on. But don't forget what happened 6 months ago either.
Mike Barnicle's with us and has a question for you, Senator. Mike.
Sure, Mike.
Senator, you've built a successful political career on the fact that you have a relationship with knowledge of what white working people, all working people actually, do for a living, how hard they work in a paycheck-to-paycheck economy. So with regard to this bill about the Capitol Police, is there a single amount of money that would restore a Capitol Police officer's faith in the system, in the people who he reports to, Congress?
Well, that's such a good way. That's such a good way to posit this, Mike, because the fact that the House and Senate, that the Republicans and Democrats are fighting over how much we fund these police officers in this Capitol security sends a message to these police officers. Do they really care about us? And I mean, I think we're getting that message around the country. I mean, I know police in Ohio increasingly understand that it's Democrats on their side because we're the ones that put dollars into local governments so they didn't lay off police and fire. And I think that that's not what really matters. What really matters is that these police officers know that we have their backs. Capitol Police and police in my home cities of Cleveland or where I grew up in Mansfield or Toledo or Fremont or anywhere around my state.
Yeah, Senator, let's talk about the child tax credit expansion a little bit more.
Sure.
It's interesting, instead of one lump payment, perhaps at the beginning or the end of the year, this is a bit more unique from what I've heard on these tax credits. They're monthly payments, and they're up to $300 per child. It seems to be such a helpful, better way to approach this. Talk about it and how you all came to that view.
Thank you. I would love to. I said on the floor of the Senate on March 6th, I turned to Senator Casey when we passed that by one vote over the course of 13 hours of voting on that Friday night and Saturday. I said, this is the best day of my political career. It's something I've worked on for 8 years, joined by Senators Bennett and Booker and Warnock. We decided we were able to get the Treasury Department to do these checks monthly. The most important instead of one lump sum. And the important thing is that we trust families to make this decision on their own. When I was doing these roundtables, a woman in Cleveland said to me, I'm going to be able to pay for child care now so I can go back to work more hours. Another woman said, I can send my son to summer camp now for a week. And a number of people in places like Sandusky or in places like Fremont and in Columbus and Dayton said to me that, I need to the last week of the month, I struggle to figure out how I'm going to pay my rent this month. And now I know I'm going to be able to pay my rent this month. I mean, think of that. 25% of Americans right now, before the pandemic, 25% of Americans who rent spend more than half their income on rent. That means that one thing goes wrong in their lives and their lives turn upside down, their car breaks down, whatever. So this is going to make a huge difference. It's going to lift 40% of people out of poverty, but it's also going to make a huge difference for those people that are on the edge, that this will make their lives a little easier and take a lot of that stress and let them focus on raising their children and going to work and paying for daycare.
Yeah. Hey, Sherrod, if you got a minute, I'd love to talk
Sure.
to you really briefly about politics, about your state. When you and I first started working together, Ohio was a swing state. Iowa was a swing state. You'd see swings of Republicans controlling it in 2 years. 2 years later, Democrats would control it. And Ohio seems to be a state that has broken more red than any other state in America. And you're one of these exceptions to the rule, it seems, in American politics. where you're winning, you're doing well, you're thriving politically in a state that's not necessarily breaking your way politically. You talk about the clown show of people going from hating Trump to embracing Trump in your state to try to win his approval. Can you explain why you succeed as a progressive in the state of Ohio when the state seems to be getting more red by the year, and what lesson other Democrats can take from you?
Well, I'm not sure of that. I go back to Barnickel's question about workers. My focus is unrelenting on workers, on how do we make low-income workers' lives a little better? How do we lift people out of poverty? A woman in southern West Virginia said to me at my Dignity of Work hearing, where I chair the Housing and Banking Committee, she said the words working and poor should not be in the same sentence. That she's a woman clearly that worked hard all her life, and she just simply can't get ahead. And my focus is always, how do you reward work? How do you talk about the dignity of work? How do you help people who are working hard as, no offense to anybody on the panel, you or me or Rachel or any of us, how hard we're working. We work hard, but so do a whole lot of millions of Americans who don't get much of a break. And my job is to help those people get a little more of a break, to strengthen the middle class, to enhance people's ability to get to the middle class. And I think that's, there's some people that won't vote for me because of guns, or won't vote for me because I'm pro-choice always, and they won't vote for me because I've been for marriage equality for 30 years. I understand that. That may be 40% of the vote, but everybody else is available. And even those 40% that will never vote for me, I fight for them in the workplace too. I always will. The child tax credit is sort of the most important thing I've ever done, working on this for a decade. But there are so many things with minimum wage, with the overtime rule, with all that matters, particularly helping workers organize so they can bargain collectively, join a union, and raise their living standards.